Hi, everybody. Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me today, I've got David Burkus, and we're going to be talking about teamwork, and we're going to be talking about how to run teams, not just from a leadership perspective, but how to run it from an empathy and a teamwork, how to get the best from your team. David, where can people find you?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Easiest place. I'm really lucky that David Burkus is a very
You're
unique
unique, aren't
name. What? So yeah, the the domain names were all open. So davidburkus.com is the easiest place. If you're watching this on the LinkedIn stream, just click that and reach out and connect.
So, how do teams work best?
So there's a line in my book that kind of became the basis for the course that you watched in this whole conversation, which is that teams work best when they understand how each other works best. And when you look at the research, what I kind of argue is that amounts to teams having both a sense of role clarity, everybody knows what's expected of them, and they know what to expect from other people, and a sense of team-wide empathy, meaning not empathy here like, I feel the emotions you're feeling, but I understand that you work differently than me. You have different work preferences, different personality, different background, knowledge, skills, and abilities. And because of that, I can anticipate your behavior and figure out the best way to collaborate with you based on what works for you, not just wanting everybody to work the way I work.
Because it's important, I think, that you raised that I've interviewed before. It was one of the books that you've written, but this one was I did a LinkedIn course of yours, and there was a number of aha moments where you were saying certain things. One of them was about how do teams work best together, and you talked about a shared understanding and then a team understanding, and it wasn't just I understand you, but how do you work? So you talk in your course about you're waiting for something to happen with but another team member has got to create something and you're waiting for it. So you think that they're lazy or stupid or whatever because they haven't produced it. And actually they didn't know that you needed it and that's about the intercommunication between the people, isn't it?
Yeah, the intercommunication between the people and also really underscores what I mean by that sense of clarity, right? Because it's not just does everyone have a clear job description and they know what the expectations are. You need to know how your work fits into the larger whole on a team. You need to know that when you're doing that, the handoff happens this way. And as a result, you're not left waiting for that, right? So I use that as a hypothetical because I think we've all been there, right? We've all been in those situations where we're collaborating with somebody either inside our company or a vendor partner or something like that. And then the whole thing breaks down. And the whole thing breaks down just because we didn't do a good enough job talking about the interdependencies between these different roles.
Because I think that we've all been in jobs where it's been very clear where you do this and I do that. But it's when there's a certain amount of overlap where there isn't the clarity, where of course, and as soon as there's overlap, where there's things like jealousy, competitiveness, all of those things can play. And then what happens is we stop talking to the person,
Yeah.
which is the worst thing that can happen.
Yeah, and I would say on most teams that I interact with that are dysfunctional, it's not even really a you do this and I'll do that type of thing. It's I'll do this and then I don't really know what you do. I don't really understand how it all works and how it fits together. And that's a recipe for, there are so many dysfunctional teams that I've worked with or heck when I used to teach MBAs and they had group projects, et cetera, that think I'm the only person doing all of the work. And it's almost never true. What is true is that there's not a large enough shared understanding to figure out how this work fits together and to see and appreciate that they're doing something different that you're not seeing, but it's there. And in fact, the easiest way to make sure people appreciate it is that they remove the you're not seeing and they make sure that everybody sees what everybody's up to.
So how do you get clear on clarity?
So my favorite tool for a team-wide sense of clarity, understanding not just what's expected of me, but other people, is what I call a huddle, right? And this is pure from the world of the agile software development. They call it a scrum. You probably know a bit more about this. Scrum is a rugby term. I'm an American.
I do, yes.
I have no idea how rugby works. I've tried. I watched Invictus, Morgan Freeman. It's a great movie. I still don't understand it. Don't understand Scrum. So because I'm an American, we switched it to a huddle, but it's the same idea. In American rules football, the huddle is when the team syncs up right before the play. And teams need something like that, where they come together for a quick period of time. This is not a 90-minute all hands meeting. This is a quick meeting, and a lot of teams do it asynchronously, where we sync up on what we're working on. I use 3 questions. What did I just complete? What am I focused on next? And what's blocking my progress? Each person answers those questions. So you get a report on, here's what everybody did last week. Say if we do it weekly, here's what the priorities are for this week. And then that third question I think is really valuable too, because it makes it clear who needs help where. You know, I am missing this resource before I can do my work, or I've never really dealt with a client like this before. And so I'd love to get a little preparation on that. And you let the team opt into helping each other. It's one thing to just have clear roles and responsibilities. It's a whole other thing to be checking in on a regular basis and working out loud so people know how each other are progressing on those roles and responsibilities.
And how do you get that balance between, walking between that and micromanagement?
So that's a great question. So this is not everybody reporting out to the manager, right? This is a team-wide meeting where people are reporting out to each other. So that's number one, right? It's not just, hey, I'm having all these one-on-ones and I'm demanding. This isn't like send me an email with 5 things at the end of the week with 5 most important things you did, right? This is not that. This is making sure the team has space to work out loud. The second thing that happens is you're not actually telling them how to do it. A lot of micromanagement that frustrates people frustrates them because it steals their autonomy, right? So the ability to decide how they work on whatever they've been assigned, or where or when, what have you. We're not doing that here. We're just talking about the what, as in what are we achieving and what's our plan of action. You still get to make the plan. The role here is just to report on what that plan is so that everybody is in on it.
So just to go through those again, what did I just complete? What am I focused on next? And what is blocking my progress?
Yep.
And that's really about blocking my progress is really about a signal to for help.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hidden help question. Yeah, exactly. I've noticed, this is just anecdotal, I've noticed we really struggle to use that H word from time to time, right? We think that if we're asking for help at work, it means we're inadequate, or that it means or we don't have enough. We're overpaid because we always need. No, most of the easy problems in work that can be solved by one person have been solved. If you're running into a problem now, odds are it's because it's a problem that requires more than just your brain. And so asking for help just makes you human. But I still like to kind of destigmatize it or externalize it. So instead of saying, where do I need help? It is, what's blocking my progress? I'm working towards these goals. What are the things that could potentially derail those goals? And then talking about it that way allows members of the team to opt in to help instead of having to ask for it. Because that's the other dilemma that can happen a lot of times, is when you do finally admit you need help, you go to your manager, you go to the team leader, and then the team leader has to think through who the right person is and connect you. This skips all of that and lets people just opt into helping each other.
Because you also talk in the training about team charters, don't you, as well, which is about getting communication, isn't it? Because we don't know how to talk to each other or ask for help.
Yeah, team charters or working agreements, or we use a bunch of different terms for them. But the idea here, that's kind of a mix of, let's say, it sort of bridges the gap between clarity and empathy, right? It's clarity on what our communication norms are. But in order to do this activity, it comes from a place of having to understand each other's differences. And so the idea here is that we get together and we answer the unanswered questions of collaboration, right? So this is everything from what tools are we using, email, Slack, Monday.com, Asana, whatever. How are we using those tools? What's a reasonable amount of time to send a message and wait for a response? And one of the big questions is, how do we want to make requests for help? Do we make them directly up? Do we put them out there to the team to opt in? And also, how are we going to respond to those? Most of the time, I've found that when there's conflict on a team, when there's frustration that stems from miscommunication on a team, it's because one person is mad that somebody else violated the communication norms they had that were not shared by the group, because the group never took the time to write those communication norms down.
And so in the team charter, it's about saying and agreeing, what do we allow people to send emails at 8 o'clock at night?
Right. So we talk about that, right?
Because for certain individuals, it's between, they actually do their email between putting the kids to bed and going to bed themselves or something. So it may actually be right for them.
Right.
I've got a person who works in Calgary in Canada, and she told me that the time differences, and the fact that people actually want to work at particular times, and 4 o'clock here is 10 o'clock there, and
Yeah, exactly. And this is also where not just what are our norms around when we're using this email. And by the way, one thing I always like to point out here is there's a difference between replying to an email and sending an email. You can always type your reply and leave it in your outbox till some other time. But I found it, especially when you've got a geographically dispersed team, spans multiple time zones, when you've got a multi-generational team, a lot of those people that are doing the 8 o'clock emails, they're kind of in that rhythm of, in a remote work world, they're in that rhythm of kids are coming home from school. We're doing some home stuff to get them fed, get them off to their activities, put them to bed, and then go hit another hour and a half before we then go to bed. If that's what works for somebody, especially if their chronotype is like a night owl, that's great. We don't want to tell them, no, you can only communicate. But we do want to set other things like, what's a reasonable amount of time to wait for a response? I don't think sending late night emails is a problem unless you also expect early morning replies, right? If you're sending an email at 8 o'clock at night and at 9:30 the next morning, you're like, how come no one's gotten back to me? That's where we have a problem. So a lot of times it's less about when are we sending or when are we using these tools, and more about what are reasonable amounts of time to wait on the other person to do their work in a time that works for them.
So you talk also in the training you do about heads up and heads down time.
Yeah. Or sometimes, sometimes I think of this as a sort of responsive time, et cetera. I think a lot of us are using, a lot of teams that are especially dispersed and remote are using tools like Microsoft Teams or Slack or what have you, that create these kind of, they have these different indicators. When am I online, offline? When am I busy? What's busy? We need to have a conversation about what busy means. And then one of the things we ought to talk about is what I call that heads up, heads down time. Heads down time is I'm working, but I'm not responsive, right? I'm in what Cal Newport would call that deep work. I'm actually really focused in. And so you won't get a response from me, but don't think that means I'm not working. I'm out at the golf course or something like that. Whereas heads up time is sort of the interruptible time, the office hours. One of the things that I think a lot of leaders should do is something that I had forced upon me when I was an academic, but then I think it's a great idea, is that idea of having office hours. We might say, oh, we have an open door policy, but in a hybrid work world, what good is an open door policy if nobody else is in the office? So it's more like, what's your heads up time where you're completely interruptible? Maybe you even have the Zoom or the Teams video open and people could literally drop in. It can take a variety of forms, but we do need some clarity on that. I think the number one reason people are overburdened in a world of remote work, this should actually make work-life balance easier, except everyone feels like they have to constantly be in heads up time and nobody's in heads down time. And also nobody's in pure downtime where I'm off the clock anymore.
Yeah, and I think management by wandering around kind of has fallen by the wayside, isn't it? Because we're all remote.
Yeah, exactly. How do you grab a coffee and wander around the office when everyone's remote? And asking for those constant check-ins all of the time does sort of feel like, oh, now we're putting even more meetings on our calendar and now we're micromanaging even more. So I think having this kind of clear, when am I interruptible? When am I not? When am I as a manager approachable? And then creating an environment where people do want to come to those office hours can be hugely beneficial.
So you talk about if-then plans.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite kind of clarity tools when we're laying out planning. A lot of us, we get the strategic plan from, on high from the senior leadership team. And sometimes the senior leadership team includes these if-then plans. But as a team, one of the things that happens is we're trying to make sense of all of that. We're trying to develop a plan of action for us as a team and yet remain flexible. And where a lot of teams break down is when one person in their work realizes that they need to make a pivot and others don't. So as we're setting out those norms and building that clarity, doing the huddles, et cetera, it's worth setting up a few if-then or what are sometimes called implementation intentions. In other words, let's talk about the situations that might trigger a pivot, and then let's already address how we're going to respond. So if we find out that in Q2 we have way less budget because senior leadership changed a few things, let's already agree on what the best plan of action is instead of waiting for that one representative for marketing to do a pivot but not tell anyone else, and now everybody's working. And by the way, this is something that I actually found not in the world of work, but actually in the world of personal development and research on that. If then or implementation plans work really, really well in your own life too. If you're trying to steer away from a certain temptation, like maybe it's eating that extra cake or maybe it's smoking or what have you, setting that if I'm in this situation, then I will respond in this positive way actually helps people stay committed to whatever their personal implementations are. So I think it's a hugely useful tool to work in a variety of forms.
Because you talk about in the training that building empathy is key to understand the perspective of others. Not just Tim likes the coffee machine. From actually know what people want.
Yeah. I think the idea here, the real goal is to have a team where I can predict Tim's behavior.
Yeah.
Right. I don't. It's not I can explain away the weird quirks of Tim. That's like a good level 1 empathy. Level 2s, 3s, etc., is where I understand Tim and his work preferences and his habits so well that I can predict his behavior, so it doesn't come as a surprise to me. And I don't think that just because he's doing something differently, he's doing it worse than I am. If that's like the number one thing I wish people could overcome on teams, is a realization that not everyone has to do work the same way you do.
Yes, and I find I think we're all in a situation where we find that we often set the standards that we have for work against everybody else, and everybody else isn't us. You talk about a manual of me. So explain to us what you mean by a manual.
Yeah, this is my favorite. This is probably what I think of as the single best team building activity out there. I often get a lot of questions when we talk about empathy and understanding people's differences, and they'll say, "Oh, so should we do a personality test? Should we do Strengths Finder? Should we do something like that?" And I say, I always say you can if you want. You can pay the licensing fees and get it all. But the most useful thing you're going to get out of it is not a type. It's a conversation about differences. And you can have that conversation about differences without paying a bunch of money to any sort of company that claims to own the know-all, end-all, be-all personality type. And that's what a manual of me is. It's literally asking everybody to take the time to reflect on how do you work? What are your own preferences? And then let's share that out. So I use kind of a 4-question structure, skeleton, framework, if you will, but you can add or subtract questions to this. And they're all fill in the blank questions. They're I'm at my best when blank, and I'm at my worst when blank. So best and worst, that's not just what work you're doing, but the situation you're in, home, office, third space, right? Hours of the day. It's whatever you think are the conditions for you to really feel like you're in flow, as Csikszentmihalyi would say. Like that's your best work. And worst work is the inverse of that. So those are 1 and 2, best and worst. 3 and 4 are you can count on me to blank. And what I need from you is blank. And these are contribution questions. Here is what I do really, really well and can, here I'm already volunteering to help in this area because you can count on me to do this. I'm amazing with Excel. I'm a great proofreader. I'm really good at coming up with a plan of action and a set of accountabilities, right? Maybe, whatever it is. And then where do I need help? Maybe I'm terrible with Excel and I don't understand formulas. Maybe I can't, this is me actually personally, I can't catch my own typos no matter how many times I try, right? I get emails from my first book that came out 10 years ago where people are like, did you know there's a typo on this page? And actually, to be fair, now I probably know them all. I just can't change them because the publisher won't. But that meant how many times did I read that book and not catch it? I'm at my worst when I'm doing that type of work. In other words, here's where I need help. So 4 questions, right? When am I at my best? When am I at my worst? When do I thrive giving other people help? And where do I tend to need help? And then you can add questions onto that, maybe share personal details, whatever else you think is relevant. If you're working in a remote, geographically dispersed team, it's probably worth adding on questions about when you want to do your best work, what hours there are and what have you, so we can find those overlaps. But it starts as a framework and it leads to that conversation about differences. It's a great activity to get all of the benefit of those different tests and what have you. None of the costs and none of the phony science, but that's a whole other monologue.
And what you say in the training also is that whenever you do this, to gain trust, the leader always goes first.
Yes. Not, and I want to emphasize here, not like too far first. I'm not asking the leader to send his or her responses out ahead of time because then people just copy the boss. But when we come together for the conversation, the leader goes first, models the way of what vulnerability and an open share looks like. And I think this is really, really important when you get to those worst questions and help questions, because unless there is some level of trust inside the team, people aren't going to be their most honest about those questions right away. But if they see you doing that, they're more likely to give the honest responses.
And in 10 seconds, finding free time, which is a great way of finding uncommon commonalities.
Yeah, we need to take back that downtime that we used to have when we all worked in the office. Coffee breaks, lunch breaks, going out to happy hour afterwards. Remote work has been great and it's been a slog, but the thing that really makes sure that it captures the benefits of the office without having to be there is that we have that time where we're not talking about work. We're talking about each other. We're talking about habits, hobbies. We're finding things we have in common that help us feel more bonded to each other and not just jumping off one Zoom call onto the next one.
And we've had a comment from Andrew Slesser, who says, good afternoon. To not know your internal customers, your colleagues, and what they need from you and vice versa is commonplace. This falls back to not showing people the whole process, even when you are not directly involved. Each employee should know that what the company does and how it's done.
Yeah, agreed. That is the essence of the clarity piece on teamwork, right? It's not just knowing what's expected of me. It's knowing how that fits in a larger whole and what can I expect from other people. And then trusting that those people are going to deliver on it.
David, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. Remind people where they can get hold of you.
Yeah, easiest place is davidburkus.com, burkus.com. But if you screw that up, Google will autocorrect because as far as I know, I might be the only one with an online presence and a very weird last name. So.
And remind me about your books.
So the most recent book is called Best Team Ever. That actually makes the core of the course that you watched on LinkedIn. Before that, there was a remote work book called Leading from Anywhere and a host of others. But Best Team Ever, probably the best book I've ever written too. So I would check that one out first.
And I certainly recommend. David's got about 4 or 5 training courses on LinkedIn. I've done them all. And I highly recommend them as well.
Oh, you're too kind. Thank you.